to our first caller.
Sounds good to me.
Let's take Mans from Sweden. How badly have I mispronounced your name? Also, you're on with Jamie and V.
Holy shit, I actually got on. Hi.
Hello, welcome. And that's unholy shit to you.
Oh, right.
No, you're fine.
Firstly, I would like to say that, Jamie, I will not be able to take you seriously with that on. Sorry.
Well, let's get serious then. How about now? There's a little bit of a delay, but can you take me seriously now a little bit? Does the headband too much?
Yeah.
All right, Mans. Am I getting your names close enough that it's not, an insult to you and your people, or?
No, it works. It works. If it's easier, you can just say Patrick. That's my middle name.
Hey, that is much less likely to be mispronounced by me. So, Patrick, it says here that you wanted to talk about how to talk to a religious person and that you need advice. Why don't you go ahead and fill us in on the background of that?
All right. So I was in a situation about 2 weeks ago when I exited the Swedish church.
Congratulations.
And while I was there, I spoke to a very nice church lady, and we discussed religions and worldviews for about 30 minutes. And I laid out all of the things that I found horrible and strange about the Bible. And she admitted that, yeah, the Bible is kind of for slavery, and yeah, it's God kind of commits genocide and things like that.
Kind of.
Just kind of.
Just a little bit.
There are some strange rules.
Genocide level 1 doesn't rise to level 2 genocide. Sorry. So she admitted, okay, there's these things, in the Bible that are not so good. And then how did the conversation go?
And so I asked her, then why do you believe in this?
Mm-hmm.
And, after a while, we got to the bottom of it, which was, I believe because it just feels better. How do you respond to that?
You should ask someone. Well, so it's important if you're trying to get someone to examine the truth value of what they believe, to focus the conversation on whether or not things are true rather than whether or not they're comfortable or whether or not the conclusions are good, which I believe is what you're talking about. So are you familiar with the methods of street epistemology?
No, unfortunately not.
So street epistemology is now a very Googleable term. Anthony Magnabosco, I think, had the very first and certainly the most prolific YouTube channel where he applies this method to, friendly people walking by. But basically, it's a method that's been developed over a number of years that allows you to do basically what I just said, which is to talk to people about what they believe and why they believe and whether they believe for good reasons, and to focus on that and to focus on that in a friendly way, because debating specifically God kind of, I don't want to use the word triggered because it has other implications about mental things, but sort of ignites in their mind all of the mental guards that shut down reasoning and questioning, because it's about conclusions.
Yeah, I know. It can get a bit too personal.
Yeah, because when you're talking about something that someone feels personally about, that affects how their critical faculties kick in. It's just a human thing, right? I have a friend who at one point in time, good friend, critical thinker, I mentioned that the Patriots, were cheating, I think, during a period where they won 1 or 2 of their Super Bowls, and therefore, I think, shouldn't deserve those, and why is Belichick still in the league? And their response was, fuck you. A person who's generally very calm, and it was interesting to see that kind of response about something that, doesn't even involve a God. Although here in Texas, the local high school football team is basically like that community's religion. It's my parents make that joke as well, and they're religious. I don't know whether
Also,
you had a...
Yeah, using how something feels or whether or not something makes you feel good or bad is not a good determinant for truth in general. And I think knowing a little bit about the conversation, you're both kind of doing that. You're saying these things that God allegedly is doing makes me feel icky and bad and awful. Like, how could he endorse slavery or, commit, semblances of genocide, right? But just because something makes us feel bad doesn't mean it's not true. And I'm not saying that the Bible is true, but I am saying that using, well, this makes me feel bad and this doesn't live up to my moral standards, isn't necessarily a method for truth. So when she comes back and says, well, it makes me feel good, she's just meeting you in that space of saying how something makes you feel determines whether or not something's true. So I'd say that arguing that the Bible doesn't make you feel good or goes against your moral precepts is great if you're talking about morality specifically, but if you're trying to call into question the truth of it, maybe that's not the best tactic, because that's just going to inspire the other person to come at it with that same lens, that same, well, this is how it makes me feel, therefore it is true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but I have another question for the two of you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you both been Christian and in this situation where it is questioned by another person?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mine, as far as questioned by a little bit, let me go first. Mine's much shorter, and yours is better, and so we should end on the strong note. So I was a Christian, and my experience of it being... I bumped into things in reality, and I went to a Catholic school even though I wasn't Catholic. So there were things that prompted me to think, oh, that's a little bit different, or, oh, what do I think about that? Very loosely and very briefly over the years. But primarily the first time, my faith was questioned was I stumbled across a specific clip from the Atheist Experience, and then wanted my faith to be questioned more, and wanted to figure out what was real, found more, and then deconverted in 11 days. So, I mean,
really?
it was
11 days?
a little bit. Yeah, 11 days. People have told me that I should write a book with that title, but it's going to be...
How to deconvert in 11 days?
Well, I don't know that I can instruct that, and it would be very short because it takes over a time span of 11 days. And
It takes
people...
me 11 days for your book.
11
That's a long
pages.
book.
That's sort of my story, and then I think V has a more...
Well, I mean, it's actually fairly similar. I grew up very evangelical, conservative Christian, and I went to a Christian undergrad college, and they were considered very liberal for being Christian, so they attracted a whole different group of Christian people. So my friend group, while still everyone calling themselves Christian, were vastly different. And as I came into contact with each of them and started questioning different aspects of why I believed this about the Bible or about God, I started realizing that everyone had their own interpretation, which was super fun, and I loved it, and it was my favorite topic. It got probably very annoying sometimes because I would just sit across someone like, tell me about what you think about God. But ultimately, what it led me to understand is that, okay, there is no one correct interpretation. Everyone builds God the way that they want God to be built. And if that's the case, and that's what I'm doing because I'm one of these people, how do we know what, if anything, is actually accurate or real? So that was kind of my path out. It was just talking to other Christians of different denominations. One of my best friends didn't believe in the concept of hell, right? And that's a very specific group of Christians who don't believe that there is any kind of punishment or anything for people who die and do not call themselves Christian. And to me, that was mind-blowing. And after a while, I was like, that actually makes sense with the way I view God, because I want my God to be moral and just, and I mean, that makes sense to me. So then I ditched hell. And then there was another person who was like, well, maybe Jesus was just a prophet and he wasn't necessarily the Son of God because we can't prove that. I was like, okay, well, I appreciate Jesus as a person, but maybe he wasn't divine. Okay. So then I maybe like questioned that. And by the end of it, after 3 or 4 years, I looked back, I was like, I'm basically a heretic. 99% of Christians would call me not a Christian. So maybe I'm not one anymore. And then that kind of opened the door to figuring other stuff out.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I don't really have that kind of experience. In a way, I feel that I have been sheltered from religion. Because, in Sweden, 70-80% of the population is atheist. And
Lucky you.
And so I feel like it's very difficult to me to understand the mindset of someone who is religious.
Mm.
Like,
so you're saying that you've always been without a God, or?
We're all without.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you've always been without the belief in a God. You've always been an atheist?
No,
True.
This is gonna sound a bit demeaning, but it is true. I stopped believing in God at the same time I stopped believing in Santa Claus when I was around
That's
6 to 7 years old.
more common than you think. Yeah.
Is it?
Yep.
All right, then.
Well, yeah, I mean...
do you have time for another topic?
Go ahead, tell me what the topic is. Let me see what we got.
Well, I have a huge interest in politics, and so I wanted to...
Called with the right host in the left chair. What do you got for me?
I have some propositions for policy that would change the way that religion is allowed to influence our society.
Interesting.
Like,
When you
for
say,
example-
sorry, as a real quick aside, when you say our society, it says here that you're calling from Sweden. Do you mean the way that religion is allowed to influence Swedish society, or do you mean society in the United States of America?
When it comes to the question of religion, how the religion is treated under the law is pretty much the same in Sweden as in the United States. So I don't feel that it's that big of a difference.
How it is treated? I don't really know how active religious nationalists are in your country at the moment. And I also don't remember, forgive me for being an American and confusing Scandinavian countries, whether Sweden was one of the nations that considered blasphemy laws relatively recently. But I can't say, oh no, that's completely unlike the United States, because our Christian nationalists are very active and given the opportunity would probably enact such laws. But you've said that you believe that religion is treated under the law in Sweden similarly to the United States, and presumably you're presenting that as a problem to be addressed in policy. Is that the case?
Yes, precisely.
Okay.
Well, shoot
Can I just
one at us. See what
quickly
happens.
run through some suggestions?
Yeah, what do you think the relationship between government and religion should be?
Well, first of all, the things that I'm proposing would be an age restriction on organized religion, meaning that you can't enter into church service until you are about 16, 18, 21 maybe, just to give every child the freedom to not be indoctrinated into a religion. And so you wait until you are old enough to make your own decision.
I mean, ideally that would happen, but I doubt that would be a policy that, I mean, at least in the U.S., people would go for.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I support it
Yeah.
as a governmental policy, actually.
I mean, I think, honestly, we should be taking more of those restrictions away in terms of age. Like, we were just talking about how, like, you can enlist, but you can't drink at 18. Like, to me, that seems very arbitrary. So adding more of those, to me, doesn't feel right. But again, my feeling doesn't determine truth. So maybe you could use an argument to convince me.
Well, that and policy is less a matter. I mean, you need facts to inform policy, but it's value judgments and ideology. It's actually one of the interesting things that I bump up against when I talk government and politics with people that are skeptics or atheists. Is this community is so used to dealing with questions that are factual, right? Is there enough reason to believe in the resurrection? Is there enough reason to believe that Muhammad heard the voice of God? Is there enough reason to accept a God? That when you ask questions of policy, where based on the values you apply to them, you can get different questions, the idea that there isn't one ultimate answer that you can determine based on reality is this amorphous, mind-blowing thing. I would say that you run into some problems of application even before you question, individual conscience and how far the right of a parent to raise their child in the way that they deem correct goes. You run into some practical problems of implementation with that, which is that, so if a 12-year-old walks into, presumably not just a church, but a mosque, etc., and it can be demonstrated that they did so independently, is that a crime? Like, do you arrest them, the child, for exposing themselves to that? Additionally, yeah, so which is just an interesting thing. And then also, if a church service is brought from the religious building to the home, is that a problem? Are priests allowed to are religious teachers allowed to visit private homes? So you have this, the values that prompt this proposal, I'm right there with you.
Correct.
Children should be exposed to a variety of ideas as are appropriate fitting their age, and educated on the cultures and histories of the world, and exposed to a variety of human beings, both in creed and color.
And most importantly, to be encouraged to think for themselves instead of
think critically, certainly.
Yeah, because, for me, the majority of my Christian upbringing was not done in a church. My dad had a home church that he would preside over, and we just meet in the living room. And then there were morning devotions and evening devotions and bedtime prayers and morning prayers. And for me, that law, even if it had been enacted, wouldn't really help very much. So
That's true. Plus, I actually forget the total number of people that are children that are homeschooled in the United States, but 75% of children homeschooled in the United States are homeschooled for religious reasons. Mm-hmm. It's basically, we're going to keep them here so that they're not taught godless blasphemy of evolution.
Yeah, that was
although,
me.
Yeah. Although
I have to do a lot of catch up with science.
Oh, yeah. You should talk to Thomas Westbrook, where it's, or Thomas Westbrook and then Genetically Modified Skeptic, because they talk about, I feel like I'm doing catch up and relearning everything that I was handed in my creationist textbooks. They're textbooks in the sense that they are books with text in them. But, there are reasons to not adopt that as government policy and to question the way it's implied. Did you have a
lot of things that I hadn't actually thought about?
Yeah.
And I guess that shows some of the shelter from religion that I've had.
Well, that's why government should have opposition to propose the counter case. That's why forgive me for speaking in purely religious terms, it's the most available and commonly understood thing available to us. But that's why every Jesus needs a Satan, or every God needs El Satan, which is the challenger, the opposition, the thing to overcome. And I'm happy to play that role. So basically, I'm happy to be Satan.
Be Satan in this case.
Yeah. That, and Satan is always, when depicted as fully human, depicted as sexually promiscuous. So, did you have a second proposal for us that we could sort of handle? We're coming up. We need to be more time conscious because we have a hard stop at 2:30. So the Atheist Vanguard, an excellent show produced by the ACA, and I mean that, can premiere without us fighting with it.
Yeah, I have some more stuff, but we don't have to get into that because that kind of ties into the whole kids and and religion. That
Okay.
theme.
Well, we've
Okay.
got an email and a Reddit and a Discord.
Yeah, I was going to say, the Discord exists, and we'll inevitably have a link here. Let me pull up the live chat that's going on right now. It's probably going to get dropped in the live chat. I'm sure it'll get dropped in a YouTube comment. The Reddit, the Discord is the ACA Discord. The Reddit for this show is r/Talk Heathen, and that's it. It's that one. I think there's probably some fan Reddits. I don't know those or show up on them, and would love to continue this conversation. So make sure it's r/Talk Heathen if you're on Reddit at all. And then
Yeah, sure.
if you want an email address where you can receive links, etc., I can give you that as well. Whatever works.
All right. Well, good. I think we're done then.
Awesome. Thank you so much for calling.
Yeah, thank you for calling in, and hope to continue the conversation online.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Hans. All right, let's